So, this is part 4 of my free will series. It's also take 4. Um, but anyhow, this will be the conclusion of my free will series, and the title of this video is Fighting the Phantom of Fate. And I think that title encompasses the sense of how we mostly experience the problem of free will. It's what Dostoevsky was talking about in gaining his point, in subverting determinism. It's Bender, in the example I used from Futurama, wanting to do something different than God knows. It's related in the old adage that Master Oogway says in Kung Fu Panda, one often meets his destiny on the road he takes to avoid it. It's the story of Oedipus. It's all these things. So this video is about addressing that sense, hopefully wrapping it up and pointing the way to escape it. But first, my uncle recently asked me just to cut to the chase in my videos and not have a long discussion, especially a long technical introduction. So for Andy, I'll give it to you here. You can have it all in 2 quotes if you're willing to dive in and unpack for yourself and yada, yada, yada. Anyways, they're not from me. The answers are already out there. So here you go. The first one from Leibniz, which I've read already in the previous videos. But perhaps it is certain from all eternity that I shall sin. Answer this question for yourself. Perhaps not. And without considering what you cannot know and what can give you no light, act according to your duty, which you do know. And the next one from Emerson, which I have not read yet, but will be a main theme in this video. I cited the instinctive and heroic races as proud believers in destiny. They conspire with it. A loving resignation is with the event. But the dogma makes a different impression when it is held by the weak and lazy. 'Tis weak and vicious people who cast the blame on fate. If you believe in fate to your harm, believe it at least for your good. For if fate is so prevailing, man is also a part of it and can confront fate with fate. If we must accept fate, we are not less compelled to affirm liberty, the significance of the individual, the grandeur of duty, the power of character. So together, those are 100% complete answers to the free will problem, in my opinion. They remain agnostic about determinism or even are pro-determinism, but they reject the ideas of our own consciousness and actions being insignificant. And that's the middle ground and consensus that I've been aiming at through these videos. So is that it? Is that all you need? You can just go back and keep listening to me read those quotes or find them and read them for yourself. Is that all you need to solve this problem? I like those quotes, but I have to go back and think about them and take them apart and connect them to other things and do all I can to find my way into the mindset that sees that they're true. And that takes a lot of work. So, and the reason why I make long videos is not because the answers or at least significant signposts pointing to the answers aren't already out there. They are. Those quotes exist. You can go find them. If you're someone who reads old dead philosophers, you'll come across them probably, or similar ones. But if that's not one of your habits, then you won't have heard them. And even if you heard them once or breezed through them in an intro to philosophy class or history of philosophy class or whatever, that doesn't mean that they'll particularly help unless you meticulously go through them over and over in your head and run down all the little wrinkles of practical application. You also, hey, you might love the sound of those quotes off the bat. I read them and was like, oh, yeah, that's it. Great. Awesome. Those are the answers. I'm just going to remember those. But then say you watch the Big Think video that I referenced in the past videos on free will. And you hear scientists asserting that, well, the free will position doesn't take into account the facts of quantum physics, the multiverse, whatever. They give a bunch of science and their professional opinions, and they say the definitive interpretation of neuroscience is that your consciousness is an insignificant epiphenomenon. And you might think, well, geez, that guy's really, qualified. He makes a good case. That sounds good too. Which one do I believe? Do you just believe the one that I say because it makes you feel good? If you have a scientific mindset, that's not going to hold up very well. And these days, you'll probably hear someone say something along the lines of, well, that Emerson quote, that's just a chauvinistic load of crap. It's just appealing to toxic male sensibilities of strength and stoicism, and thus perpetuating the system of oppression and ignoring systemic injustices. I mean, that sounds good too. Emerson's an old dead white male, so he's pretty much a demon anyways, so why should we listen to him? So the point of making the videos, the point of the philosophy is not to be short and just give me the answer. The point is to show the work and to go through it and to say, this will stand the test of all of the storms. And I'm hopefully trying to instruct and show that and help you get into that mindset where you can know and believe that too. And so when someone comes along and says, no, actually, you don't have significance, and here's why, you can be pretty confident and say, I think that's wrong. Maybe I don't know how at this point, but I'm willing to look into it and think it through because I think there's probably a mistake in there based on what I've seen, on how this works out. So, these epic ancient quotations that we come across, although the two I shared aren't really that ancient at all, but we have to adapt these thoughts to modern life and modern thought and connect to them and get behind them and understand them. So Andy, you can sign off now. I'm going to keep talking. My videos are going to be long. Though for my part, 4 videos on free will coming in a total around 3 hours, I think is pretty good for theoretically offering a solution to the entire free will problem, which is like one of the biggest philosophical discussions and debates of all time. I don't think that's too bad personally. Anyways, my last video addressed most of the issue I wanted to get to with regards to free will and the perspective which unlocks the freedom from the problem. And that's the perspective of understanding more what being beyond time means and starting to unpack the errors that we make of projecting time and space language on something that is beyond. It's not outside of space and time because outside is a spatial relation. Anyways, so this video is about addressing the continuing residual anxiety of being in a worry loop about fate but what if something knows my future and controls my outcomes? Or what if I'm fated to do something I don't want? Leibniz, perhaps it is certain from all eternity that I shall sin tomorrow. That perspective and that thought keeps coming up. And so we're going to try to really cement the understanding of being able to get out of that. I think my last video especially really uprooted all the grounds for the negative views of fate and deterministic arguments, but there are a few more perspectives and illustrations that I'm going to cover here, again, to really cement the point. And I do want to say a little bit more about the identity question because it weighs so much on the issue, but I'll save that for the end because it'll get pretty technical. And we'll also talk about the nature of freedom itself and how that got tangled in the free will issue and contributes to sort of the confusion. But to reiterate an important point that I think I hopefully completely established last time, changing the course of the future, changing the course of your future, influencing your future, is not at all connected to surprising a supreme view beyond time, whether you call it God or call it a thought experiment. Something that knows your future, regardless of whether you could theoretically do something completely chaotic and unconnected to anything before it. Something that is beyond time would still see you doing that in the time that you did it. at this sequential location of your action chain, it would see that moment as well as all the other moments, and so it wouldn't be surprising in the sense of unforeseen. It would see it. Anyhow, that is not connected to changing the course of your future, which is absolutely possible. So in the same way, the worry about a view beyond time existing, worrying about something which knows your future, is not at all connected to you having no power over your future or your consciousness being insignificant. Just because your future is known, and even all of your possible futures are known, does not mean that your consciousness, as it interacts with your actions, has no influence or power over which future you end up being connected to and going through. We absolutely have significant choice and significance regardless of what level of determinism we accept. So that's just a rehashing of last time mostly. So if you're not there yet, maybe go back to last time and really review that and understand how that is the case. So another point that makes people attached to the idea of free will that I haven't really explicitly covered is responsibility. When people hear determinism proposed, they think, oh, that's just a way to get rid of responsibility. And I've just been focused on significance. But significant choice, which I've been harping on so much that's preserved, entails responsibility. If you have significant choice, you have responsibility. Those two things are significant choice encapsulates and includes responsibility. So all the elements of significance and responsibility that free will was there to impart and protect are preserved, no matter what level of determinism is proposed. The idea that there is a determinism which proves your consciousness insignificant is simply a falsity. There is no rational, cohesive, evidence-based, evidence-supported position of determinism that says your consciousness is insignificant. There's no way to get to that conclusion that is not simply a faith-based approach of, I'm just going to choose to believe this, regardless of the evidence or logic involved. Yet, this proposal that maybe we are insignificant, maybe we don't have control, or at least we don't have the control that we would want to have, that captures our minds. And so hopefully in the last videos I went over clearing up the idea of what level of control you actually do want. You don't want like a disconnected control where you don't have inputs from the world or from your bodily organism or whatever. But still, this perspective tortures us because we can't escape the inner sense that we have that we are significant. Partly because when you think, well, I am, you think, oh, I'm going to accept the idea that I'm insignificant. But that's going to change the course of my thoughts and actions and future. Therefore, I am significant. Anyhow, but we can sort of pretend to believe that we're not significant. We can pretend that we don't see that contradiction and pretend, well, maybe I'm just not getting it. Maybe there really is this way that I'm robbed of all significance and choice and even like my core existence. So that's what we're going to be focused on. And there's an excellent illustration of this from the book The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. So spoiler alert, it's hard to say at this point. It doesn't seem, we're all still waiting on the third book, but the part I'm going to talk about doesn't seem to be exactly the main storyline, so maybe it's not like that big of a spoiler, but who knows, maybe it would be once we get the third book out, it might end up being a key part. But in any case, I'm going to talk about this story, so you've been warned. For this illustration, there are 4 relevant characters to know. One is Kvothe, who's the main character, his friend Bast, who's a fey creature, basically a fairy, another human man named Chronicler, or the Chronicler, and then the Cathane, who is a fey creature as well. And then Chronicler and Bast don't get along well. And Bast knows about the Cathane through being from the same world. Anyhow, so the way the story goes is Kvothe's the main character. He's telling the story of his past, and he relates this interaction he had with a character who he met, who was named the Cathane. He talks about it, talks about sort of how weird it was, and then gets finished with that section of his story and looks up, and his friend Bast is sitting there just aghast. And he's pale, looks horrified, and Kvothe is kind of like, what's up? And Bast explodes, goes off on Kvothe and says, "You cannot make this up. Do not lie to me. You have to tell me the truth." You're just shouting at him, berating him, like, basically, don't BS me on this. And Kvothe's like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just telling the story of what happened to me." And then Bast is even more upset because now he's like, wait a minute, you talked to the Cathane. How is this possible? And he starts explaining that in his world, the Cathane is understood to be the most evil creature in existence, period. He's like the worst demon ever conceived. And the reason that he is so evil is that the Cathane knows literally everything. All of the future and all possible futures about everyone and anyone and anything. And the Cathane will only tell the truth, but he will selectively pick the things to tell you that are truthful or part of the truth that will affect you in the worst possible way going forward, put you on the worst possible path that you could ever be on. Just by these little things that he says, he gives you a few revelations, asks you a few disturbing questions, and totally just completely screws your future. Anyone who ever interacts with him is basically now a tragic character. Their life is completely screwed. Everything ends up bad for them, everyone around them. That's the story that Bast understands about this character. He's going on and on about this. Finally, he convinces Kvothe of this, and Kvothe's like, "Oh, okay, like that. I believe you. That sucks." Kind of explains a lot, but okay. And they go their separate ways for the night. Except Chronicler follows Bast, and he goes up to him in his room and says, "Hey, I don't get it. Like, why are you so upset about this?" Bast is already stressed out, already upset. already doesn't like Chronicler, so he's, he just goes off on him, and he's like, you don't know what you're talking about. We know about this creature. You don't. Don't question me. You couldn't possibly understand. And Chronicler's basically like, okay, whatever. And he starts insulting Bast. And Bast is, again, already upset, already doesn't like Chronicler, and is already a pretty volatile guy or volatile fairy. Anyhow, so he's pretty quick to try to attack Chronicler. But just before he does, Chronicler says, no, actually, the Cathane foresaw this future, and he knew this is what you would do, and this is what he wanted you to do, because this is the future he intended. So this is the worst possible outcome for all of us, all of your future, all of the rest of the world, is you attacking me right now. And Bast kind of goes, and like is deflated. He sits down, puts his head in his hands, and Chronicler starts insulting him again, and goes through this process again. And he comes to the point with Bast, and he says, look, if you've accepted this antecedent, this pre-story of the Cathane is the most evil thing ever and has control of everything and has completely screwed up your life, then there's no point in worrying about it. You might as well just do whatever you want, because if you worry about it and do what you wouldn't normally want to do, he had foreseen that, and he knew that you were going to do that instead of what you wanted to do. If you do what you want to do, then he knew that you would do that, and it's still the worst possible thing. By definition, from the story you've set up, there's nothing that you can do, so you might as well not worry about it. He doesn't go into that much detail about it. It's a very simple explanation. You might as well just do whatever you want. You might as well just attack me, because there's no getting out of, because you've given this Cathane so much power, trying to get out of his trap is still being in his trap. So I think this is a brilliant story and a brilliant explanation. It's simplistic, but it gets the right message across. And I made a little decision window to illustrate this a bit more. See, I knew mirror writing would come in handy, so you'd be able to see or read what's on here. Basically, this is what the Chronicler is talking about. These are the options. On this line, you have the Cathane has complete control. On this line, you have actually he doesn't have complete control. And then up here, we're talking about you worrying about it too, like not just you're worried, you have some anxiety and you're careful about your actions, but you're excessively worried. You doubt yourself to extreme extents. You second guess everything. You're worrying too much is this line. And you don't really worry about it too much. You don't let it completely make you doubt yourself in everything and doubt your own significance. And Chronicler's simple explanation of just don't worry about it works out, because if he has complete control, if he really, really has complete control, the reality is, I'll come back to this, the reality is you don't really have any responsibility anymore. If it's really true that this demon has control over absolutely everything, and by interacting with you has taken control of your entire future and your fate, then everything's on him, if that's true. So there's no point in worrying about it. Wait, is that's the wrong one. This is the mirror writing one. So if he really has complete control and you worry about it too much, you just spend your life in anxiety when everything's on him. So that's not a good outcome for you or the world. It's going to be a bad outcome for the world in any case, but at least you can not worry about it, right? That's getting over here. He has complete control. He's a demon. He's in control of everything. That sucks, but at least you don't worry about it. So at least you're happy. Even though that's the worst possible thing in the world, it's not going to get better if you're stuck on this line. It's not going to get better by you worrying about it. And it's not going to get worse by you not worrying about it.
if that's true. It's not true, but anyhow. So you might as well be over here. And then the other option is he actually, this is just a story. He does not have complete control like you think he does. If it's the case that he doesn't have complete control and you worry about it too much, you worry about, oh, maybe he does have control. Maybe I don't know what's right. Maybe this is what he wanted. And you second guess yourself and you get in your way, then that's probably him messing with you and getting his way, right? Like you doubt your own instincts and feelings and everything. So you just basically have no direction in life and you screw up everything because you feel like you're cursed. You know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is a bad outcome for you and the world. But if it's the case that he does not have complete control and you don't worry about it, then you're good. Like not worry too much, not be careful about your actions and not take no responsibility, but just don't let it tie you into knots. You're good. So in either case, as long as you're on the don't worry about it column, you're good. That's where you need to be. And this scenario up here is actually non-existent. This is garbage. He does not have complete control of your life. There's no way that he could, as we'll talk about. But at least, even if you've accepted that this false story, at least getting you over here is actually getting you right here in reality. If you're behaving in this way, you're actually living and functioning right here, even if you believe you're up here. So Chronicler's really simple explanation of just don't worry about it just centers you right here. This is where you want to be. This is where it's good to be. This is where you are. But he just bypasses all of this and says, just don't worry about it. Just be right here. Even if you think you're up here. Anyhow, so I think that's a brilliant story. Reading it is also worth it. It's a little bit, more eloquent, more detailed. It's also a great book. Anyhow, so we don't like this upper level of he has complete control, and that anytime we're proposing someone has complete control of over my fate, like, but wait, what, how, who, why? The reason why we stress about this fate, this demon controlling everything, the reason why we would have that anxiety and be like, wait, he wants me to do this, I should do something else, is because we believe internally, we can't escape this belief, and we know we have some level of control, and we believe that we can beat fate through effort. Because if this thing has control over you and it's using you to do evil, you have the capacity to do evil. You have significant effect on the world, which also means you have the capacity to do good, having significant effect on the world. And we know that if we take different mindsets, our decisions and actions and results will change. Therefore, we have significant choice. So we know that we have significant choice. We know even if we resign to the fact we're insignificant, he has complete control, that's going to put us on a different path of causes and effects and attitudes towards the world than if we say, I don't think he really has complete control. So we have this inner sense of, and this inner knowledge of, we have significant choice, but we don't always know how to really defend that and say, yes, that is true. So the story of fate, of like a fate to do evil or whatever, or the story of the Cathane, is a story that your significance has been taken away. Your significant choice has been taken away. And in that sense, it's actually a story that you do not exist. Because one of the core conceptions of yourself is that you are a significant chooser, that your consciousness and your thoughts have the ability to decide your path. That you are, at least in part, a consciousness that has variable effects on the world. If it's true that the Cathane has made it so that no matter what you decide to do, you are acting for the ultimate badness, the worst possible scenario. He has erased your existence. And there's a weird appeal to this idea. I think part of it is that we know we don't have complete control, so there's this idea of like, what if something else has a lot more control and renders me essentially insignificant? Which is basically the idea that what if life itself is fundamentally hostile or fundamentally demonic, essentially, and is just a trick and thwarts you no matter your efforts. That's a horrifying thought, but it captures us in a way. And I think also because usually these things are presented with this like false appeal to humility, like, well, if you really understood like this Cathane, you can't really understand him, but if you really understood, then you would know that he actually does have complete control over you. If you really understood neuroscience, you would understand that your consciousness is insignificant. And it's like, so there's this false appeal to humility that's like, if you really knew, you just don't know enough. You need to be humble and accept that you just can't understand it well enough to really know. And so there's like this buy-in of like, well, okay, I'll be humble and I'll be open to this idea that maybe I just don't know enough and I can't know enough because I'm limited. Maybe there is this thing that's so much less limited and has so much control about me, and I just can't trust my own thoughts, opinions, intuitions, whatever. And then it takes everything away from it, and therefore you don't exist, therefore you're insignificant. But we need to come back to Leibniz. We need to realize, don't consider the things that are completely outside of your knowability. Don't consider that which you cannot know and which can give you no light. Act according to your duty, which you do know, right? We know that we have multiple potentials in front of us that our consciousness interacts with in a way to put us on one of a multitude of paths. We know that we have significant choice. We know that we exist. We'll get into the identity question later. We know that, for now we'll say, we know that we exist, and even though we can pretend to talk ourselves out of this, like the identity people like Daniel Dennett, who says, no, you actually just don't even exist, whatever, then who are you talking to and why are you talking? Again, we'll talk about that later and we'll get into it technically. We still know that if we accept the idea that we don't exist and behave and try to behave in that way, it won't be coherent, but if we try to be coherent with that idea and accept it as much as possible, we're going to go through life acting differently and therefore having a different experience than if we had not accepted it and believed in ourselves and as existent things and done different things. This is the fact that our consciousness has a variable effect. Even if it's an aggregate, non-self-centered consciousness, skipping ahead a bit, it's still our consciousness, our thoughts, our attitudes, our dispositions, our decisions, all of that is connected to the paths that we take in life. And there's different avenues for that. Therefore, we have significant choice, no matter what. If you act without care or responsibility, it will be different than if you do act with care and responsibility. So again, chronicler, when he said, just don't worry about it, just do whatever you want, he wasn't really saying act without responsibility. He was really saying exactly what Leibniz said. He was saying, you're in this loop of thinking, perhaps it is certain from all eternity that I shall sin. Perhaps it is certain that the Cathane has screwed me over eternally. Perhaps it is certain that I'm fated to do something terrible that I don't want to do. Answer this question, all of these questions, for yourself. Perhaps not. And without considering what you cannot know and what can give you no light, act according to your duty, which you do know. So I think Chronicler was really saying act according to your duty, not really do whatever you want in a non-caring way. Anyhow, I think it's a really great illustration of this idea. So you just have to have sort of the confidence to not accept the idea that this demon, the Cathane, has screwed with you so much that you can no longer trust your own judgment or thoughts. Doesn't mean don't be careful about it and don't say, okay, he did mess with me, so he has some influence, so I'm going to think about what I'm doing and try my best, which will involve some level of anxiety, but not going to the extent of second guessing yourself and just thinking, well, maybe I don't know. Maybe everything I think I know is 100% backwards and wrong, and therefore I'm going to do the opposite and get in this, then you're on the path of one meets his fate on the path he takes to avoid it. Anyhow. So you just come back to the Leibniz. You just come back to don't consider what can give you no light. Act according to your duty, which you do know. And it's like, well, what if I can't? What if I'm determined? What if the Cathane? What if it's just an anxiety trap? It's a logical setup that you can't escape once you've accepted the antecedent. Once you've accepted, there's this character out there who's really erased your existence and taken control of everything. Then, yeah, you're screwed. But you might as well not worry about it because you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And in reality, you're just accepting a logical trap and getting worried about it because you also secretly believe that it's not true and you really want it not to be true. So you got to find a way not to worry about it. And if you need to think, well, he does have complete control, therefore everything's on him, then do that. But the reality is just he doesn't have complete control. Okay, so that pretty much covers fighting the Phantom of Fate, I think. I hope. So let's go back to Emerson as well. I cited the instinctive and heroic races as proud believers in destiny. So the praiseworthy people, the heroic people, believed in destiny. They believed in essentially fate, like your future being known. They conspire with it. A loving resignation is with the event. And as we'll see later in the quote, he's not talking about not caring in sense of resignation. He's not talking about not having responsibility, not acting with care. But I think he is saying, he's talking about this amor fati, the love of fate. Like if something happens to you that you didn't want, you take it in stride and you say, okay, maybe that was fated, but the way I react to it is not fated. And I can, after going through this thing that, because you don't have control over everything, some things happen to you, whatever. After going through the difficulties of what are happening to you that you don't like, you still have choice of where you go, where you step from there. Anyways, back to Emerson. The dogma makes a different impression when it is held by the weak and lazy. 'Tis weak and vicious people who cast the blame on fate. So I couldn't have done anything. I'm insignificant. I don't have responsibility. So again, him saying loving resignation is not him saying you don't have responsibility, as he goes on to say. If you believe in fate to your harm, believe it at least for your good. So don't accept this idea that life and fate are demonic. Believe it if it's powerful, but believe that it has, some positive interest in you, not that life is out to get you. For if fate is so prevailing, man is also a part of it and can confront fate with fate. And this is what I've been talking about. Your thoughts and actions are connected to the progress of the world. They are part of the process and progress of the world. So in the sense that fate is supposedly this thing that knows and controls everything, That includes your consciousness and your thoughts and actions and dispositions, and therefore you are part of fate, and you can confront fate with fate. You can make decisions. You have significant choice. If we must accept fate, we are not less compelled to affirm liberty, the significance of the individual, the grandeur of duty, the power of character. And that goes back to, I think it's a Hermann Hesse quote that is like, a man's character and his destiny are two terms for the same thing, something like that. Again, you have significant choice, you have impact, you have influence, even if, no matter how much determinism and fate we accept. Okay, so now we're going to talk briefly about the idea of freedom, the value of freedom and freedom itself, because a lot of people, when they talk about free will, they think about freedom. And they're also thinking about significance and responsibility, but they're thinking about freedom as well. And a lot of people think free will is the basis of freedom. I'm going to say that's not the case. And it actually helps us to clear this up, to, again, be more open to this new conception of neither free will nor determinism, but significant choice that I've been talking about. So what we were sort of aiming at, or what we should have captured when we were talking about free will, the reality that's here, the reality of the level of freedom and influence and significance that we have on the level of our physical organisms interacting with the world. We can call this an embodied freedom, a freedom within creation, within the limited rules of the game, say, or environment, or whatever. So this embodied freedom is really what we're talking about, is creativity in consciousness that is connected to the body, the actions, process of the world. So this creativity of consciousness is our ability to see or hypothesize or imagine different futures, different possibilities, and to plan and implement choices, inputs of causation that will hopefully direct us towards the goal that we want. But even if it's a different direction, our inputted cause does have an effect, and comes from a multitude of inner possibilities. So this is like creativity in consciousness, creativity in action. It's not unlimited freedom. It's not pure absolute freedom, because as I showed before, the sort of pure absolute freedom that we hypothesize that we want is like, best case scenario, like lucid dream world, where you can do whatever you want, but nothing really means anything. And the reality of what it would be is the worst case scenario, which is like complete and utter chaos, disconnection from everything, an insignificant will, a disconnected will, and it's basically uncreation. It's chaos. Which is the same thing. If I could just spontaneously manifest whatever I want and everyone else could, that's not going to create, a fun, meaningful sandbox world where we all work together. That's going to create chaos, hell. Anyhow, that's one level of freedom. And that's what we're talking about with free will. It's embodied creativity. It's embodied creation and action, the creativity of consciousness, and the multiplicity of options. Then there is another level of freedom that is sort of freedom itself, the true freedom, the pure freedom, or infinite freedom. And that is simply the existence of the infinite itself. It is the infinite itself, which means our transcendent nature. It is salvation. It's everything. And as far as that goes, my book, Purpose Informed, The Necessary Basis of All Ethics, available on Amazon. I would say the first chapter and like sort of the foundation of the approach is an argument for the inevitability, the knowability of the fact that the infinite exists, that life is infinite. So the first chapter is called The Myth of the Finite. And it's taking down the myth of a finite world or a finite creation or a finite life. So for those who are like, well, I don't believe in the infinite, well, you can read my book if you're open to the idea. So the important thing here is these are two separate levels and you cannot mix them. You cannot say, I want ultimate freedom, which is the infinite self, our transcendent nature, embodied in creation. Because if you want ultimate freedom in creation, you do not want creation. You want uncreation. You want chaos. You want disassociation. You do not want to be connected to the world and part of the process of the world, which has limited elements. So what you want in the world and what we are aiming at with free will is a playable and meaningful game, which means significance, connection to the world, impact on the world, which implies a level of determinism. So not infinite freedom, but still an openness, still a creative potential that's connected to your consciousness and your efforts and your disposition, etc. So if you get this right and you can keep the levels separate, you do not want infinite freedom within creation. And that's okay because you have infinite freedom foundationally, not outside of creation, but that's a complicated discussion. But anyhow, you have all the freedom of the infinite. Now, you have to go down the route of who am I and the identity question to properly understand it, because again, I've said you can't do whatever you want, so you don't have infinite freedom, but I'm also saying infinite freedom exists and is connected to you in a way. So anyhow, that brings us to the identity question, which I said I wanted to address. In the last video, I talked about it and how it has like a different emphasis on the problem, and that's why I took sort of a weird approach to defining choice as just sort of the reality of an openness and the connection of our consciousness to a particular manifestation of the future versus another one. But this weighs so much on the issue, I thought I needed to say a little bit more along those lines. So there are people who talk about the absence of any real identity or self, and they often base this on neuroscience, modern science, as well as they get compared to Buddhist philosophies. So, disclaimer, I have not extensively listened to Sam Harris. So I'm going to try to avoid saying like this is his exact opinion or the exact way he presents it, but I think he's sort of in this camp of these people like him, Daniel Dennett, some others who are like neuroscience-y people who take this, or at least from my understanding, are purported to take this view of the lack of a self to mean lack of free will. I have seen him denying free will, so I know he does that. Anyhow, and I know that people compare him to sort of Buddhist takes. But there's a problem with this connection to Buddhism on the one hand, and there's also a problem with the one-step argument of proposing a lack of self, regardless of what foundation you base it on, and thereby rejecting free will and everything that it entails. So when you propose the lack of a center of consciousness, you do have a good argument against the base. It's kind of a straw man, but it's kind of a common one. So, but anyhow, you have a good argument against the low resolution illustration of free will as an inner homunculus, a little dude, sitting behind things and choosing all your thoughts, feelings, etc., being disconnected from any inputs himself, yada yada. As I said, that's nonsense. But to say that the conception of no self, a lack of a center of self, uproots free will so completely that it also grabs with it our beliefs about our significance and our significant choice is not a fair delineation and discussion. It reaches way too far, and I do think people who are supporting the no self view are at fault for overextending their argument and not even understanding their own position, really. Modern secular neuroscience people often explicitly say that, yes, this means you don't have choice, you don't have significance, life is meaningless. And it's just like, no. Like, you could kind of get away with it if you were just sort of obliquely saying that, but so many of them actually do overtly say that. That's just like, you guys are off base. Again, for a really complete discussion of this and refutation of it, go check out my book. But as I'll say here, like, it's true in sort of a perverse way that you don't have choice or control, but it's also very wrong. And it's more wrong than it is true. It is true in the limited sense. It is true that without a self, there can be no choice if we define choice as necessarily having an outside chooser who's a little homunculus that just like completely freely and disconnectedly boops, whatever he wants along the way. Yeah, that image of choice is incorrect which I agree with, if the case is that there is no self. But this is just a sort of gotcha moment. It's like, oh, well, we were wrong in our image of how to portray choice. Therefore, we must be wrong about everything else. And then you get people like, and you're insignificant, and there's no meaning. And it's just like, no. Yes, the image is wrong. Yes, there is no self. But losing the idea of a separate chooser and destroying this image that we had of choice in no way devalues the significance of the connected manifestation of your consciousness to your actions, to the world, to a particular path over other possible future paths. In this way that I define choice is just like the reality of the openness of the future, regardless of the future's and all the future's multiple real existences already outside of time. The process of choice, regardless of the existence of a separate chooser, still leads to the end of being on one path rather than another. And it's connected to, even if it's not your consciousness, it's connected to the consciousness that is associated with this body mind, and even if it's an aggregate consciousness, it still has significant effects on the path and the actions, the dispositions, etc., of the organism, even if it's an aggregate organism with an aggregate consciousness, to use the Buddhist language. So it's kind of ironic because these arguments that are taking the no self perspective, they propose a radically different view of consciousness. And therefore they uproot the old conception of a centered, autonomous, homunculus driven consciousness. And then they conclude that since the old version of consciousness is unreal, then sort of all consciousness and significance is unreal. But they don't look at the new consciousness. Like, you still have consciousness. It's not what you thought it was. You can't describe it in the same ways. You can't even call it yours, technically. But there's still consciousness, a conscious process, even if it's not centered, occurring. So they kind of skip the reality that there's still something there that we're talking about. So I think they're at fault for not really properly just saying, they're like arguing against something they already proved wrong and saying because it's wrong, therefore no consciousness exists. Like saying, anyways. So saying there is no self does mean there is no chooser, no separate chooser. But this does not mean that there is no choice in the sense of the openness of potential that I defined last time. And again, in a similar way, saying there is no self does mean that there is no center of self. But that may not mean that there is no consciousness in any form. And that by extension, there is no significant impact of consciousness regardless of the form that it takes. So yeah, I think it's a very poorly formulated argument to extend the no self conception. Again, they sort of focus on these gotcha moments of like, yeah, we cannot talk in no self language. It is actually impossible. Even if you try to talk in no self language, you're going to slip up, you're going to screw up. There's some benefits to it for sure, of thinking about it and rethinking your old assumptions and whatnot. But if you just are like, well, no, there's actually no self. So because you've been talking as though there is a self, every single thing that you have entailed within your assumptions is wrong. And like, no, that's not at all correct. If you want to talk in no self language, let's define that at the beginning and both recognize that we're gonna screw up and we're gonna just do our best. But it's gonna be complicated, it's gonna be confusing, and people won't be able to really follow it. So the reality is we're gonna talk in self-centered language. And so we should expect that and not use that as like, oh, you implied a self, therefore everything that you've implied is also wrong. So that is sort of the only way that I've seen that determinism tries to make a cohesive point that actually this means that you don't have significance. This means you don't have significant choice. Is like the sort of Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris way of saying pretty much you don't exist. And it just, it doesn't hold through. So, and again, then there's a second problem of these modern neurosecular nihilist theories being connected to Buddhism, because the Buddha said, yes, there is no self, but the Buddha also said there is not annihilation. So that's a pretty big puzzle. There's no self, but there's no annihilation of self, or annihilation of consciousness is usually how that's interpreted. So if you're just sort of riding on the coattails of Buddhism and being like, oh yeah, there's precedent for this, they knew this a long time ago. Well, they also knew that there was no annihilation. So extending your arguments on that pretense to lack of significance, lack of any consciousness whatsoever, lack of meaning is very much unfounded. And I think there's a useful analogy to illustrate this from modern Einsteinian physics, which actually denies the existence of a force of gravity. That doesn't mean it's safe to jump off a cliff. You can get into a technical argument about how it's not completely in line with modern physical theory to say gravity will kill you if you jump off a cliff. But if someone takes that to mean it's safe to jump off a cliff, and you lead off with, well, yes, technically gravity doesn't exist, and before you finish, they've already jumped, you're getting some wires crossed. In the same way, you can talk about the conception of no self, but if people are hearing that and concluding that they're insignificant, that their consciousness has no impact on their life, and their life is meaningless, and you're even agreeing with and purporting all of those or any number of those, you're just confusing yourself and others with technical jargon. So, like, yes, there is no self. Yes, there is no force of gravity. Within time, supposedly gravity is the tendency for things to fall is them bending through time, because time is bent in the presence of large mass objects that are distorting space-time. Whatever, from our perspective within time, things still fall, and you will fall if you jump off a cliff. So yes, technically there is no self, but you saying you're insignificant to someone and them believing you and thinking, oh yes, I'm insignificant because there's no self, and therefore I have no responsibility, or my life is meaningless, or whatever, is going to lead them down a different path than you saying, yes, you are significant. And saying, yes, you are significant is closer to the truth, even though there's no self, than purporting that life is insignificant and life is meaningless and your consciousness has no connection or effect on the process of your actions. Again, in Buddhist philosophies, they talk about right attention, right thought, right action. Those are all core elements of significant procedures and meaningful procedures. So again, you can't really connect it to Buddhism in any way if you're in this sort of neuro-secular nihilist person. You can use the terms of like, oh yes, there's no self, you're an aggregate consciousness, but you can't claim any of the precedents of Buddhism if you're going along the route of meaninglessness. Again, my book does a much more thorough takedown of that. But just to reiterate, the Buddhists say no self and teach no self as a hallelujah, as nirvana, as good news, great tidings, ultimate salvation, everything we could have ever wanted and more. Now, you can say, oh, it's joy, it's unspeakable joy. Then they'll say, well, no, you're going to get caught up in the emotion of joy. And you can get in this, they speak apathetically. So if you're not going to speak apathetically, they'll be like, no, you're not really saying what we're saying, whatever. Again, there's a more detailed discussion of that in my book. The reality is, if the conclusion you're drawing from no self is basically nihilism, saying you're meaningless, you're insignificant, your consciousness has no effect, you have no control, no choice, etc. That's even if you're borrowing Buddhist words and ideas, that's a very big difference between that philosophy or that science and the doctrine of nirvana. So that just, I think, needs to be clear, and there's a good reason for keeping those separate. So just to close, I'm going to reread the quotes that I read at the beginning. But perhaps it is certain from all eternity that I shall sin. Answer this question for yourself. Perhaps not. And without considering what you cannot know and what can give you no light, act according to your duty,
which you do know. Don't get distracted by people proposing demons or science that takes away your significance, whatever. Realize the openness of the future is there and it is connected to your consciousness. So just act according to your duty and don't get caught in the anxiety or logical traps that create anxiety. I cited the instinctive and heroic races as proud believers in destiny. They conspire with it. A loving resignation is with the event. But the dogma makes a different impression when it is held by the weak and lazy. 'Tis weak and vicious people who cast the blame on fate. If you believe in fate to your harm, believe it at least for your good. For if fate is so prevailing, man is also a part of it and can confront fate with fate. If we must accept fate, we are not less compelled to affirm liberty, the significance of the individual, the grandeur of duty, the power of character.